On this day, in 1896, the Marine Board concluded a 2-month-long investigation into the tragic sinking of a vessel in Queensland waters. As a result of the accident, almost 30 people lost their lives, and the Marine Board was left with the task of passing judgment on what or who was to blame for the incident. At the time it occurred, it was one of the greatest disasters that had befallen Brisbane, taking place almost in the heart of the CBD. Within hours of the event, it will become known as the Pearl Disaster. As a result of the devastating floods that struck Brisbane in 1893, half of the Victoria Bridge was washed away in the torrent, completely severing the main lifeline between the two banks of the Brisbane River. Having been cruelly plunged back into the dark ages of the city's early era, where watercraft were the only means of transportation between north and south, a temporary and rickety wooden bridge was hastily constructed from the northern bank to link up with the surviving southern section of the bridge in the river's centre. 3 years later, in 1896, whilst construction of the second permanent Victoria Bridge was well underway, the Brisbane River was swollen and flowing heavily again from torrential rain. On Wednesday, the 12th of February, the piles and the piers of the temporary Victoria Bridge section, which was still in use for traversing the river, came under immediate assault from floating debris. By 5:45 a.m. the next morning, over 2 acres of floating debris had backed up before the structure, and 5 bridge piles shattered under the phenomenal weight and pressure with an ear-piercing crack, damage that would see half of the bridge sag nearly a metre. All traffic across the bridge was immediately halted, throwing Brisbane's morning commute into complete chaos. Watching the drama unfold, local authorities scrambled to press into service every suitable vessel they could find. Ferries would once more become the only link between the north and the south banks of the Brisbane River. Of the 4 vessels employed, one was the Pearl, a small steamship. At 5 p.m. in the afternoon, the working class of Brisbane made their way down to Queen's Wharf, near the front of the now old commissariat store. The Pearl lay alongside, eagerly waiting for her passengers. To this day, the exact number of souls who boarded the vessel that fateful afternoon is open to debate. However, the agreeable complement sits between an approximated 70 to 80 people. At 5:05 p.m, the Pearl pulled away from the wharf, the Normanby and government steamer Lucinda being anchored in her path further out into the stream. Throughout the day, the Pearl had passed between the two ships on a number of occasions, in an attempt to placate passengers' concerns that the vessel was taking a longer route between the riverbanks than necessary. A travel path that had already seen the Pearl clip the stern of the Normanby on one occasion, and ride over the anchor cable of the Lucinda on another. On the 5 p.m. run, the Pearl attempted to again run between the two vessels. On nearly clipping the stern of the Normanby again, the engines of the Pearl were called to a stop, at which time an eddy of water between the vessels shunted the Pearl backwards unexpectedly. Before the engines could be started again to adequately get the Pearl underway, the surge slammed the vessel down on the anchor line of the Lucinda, effectively cleaving the steamer in half. Men, women and children slid across the deck as the ship disappeared beneath the surging waters in less than 30 seconds. Some luckily struck on the Lucinda's anchor chain and climbed aboard to safety, whilst further passengers were able to grab lifelines immediately thrown by the crew of the Lucinda, who were on watch. Unfortunately, many who were on board the Pearl ended up in the swollen river and found themselves being flushed downstream at a rapid rate. Over the following hour, 30 to 40 people would be plucked from the river. However, approximately 30 would be washed away to their deaths, a tragic factor that would see bodies slowly recovered from the floodwaters over the space of the next few weeks from as far afield as Redcliffe and Bribie Island. On the 15th of April, at the conclusion of the inquest into the sinking, the Marine Board found that James Chard, the captain of the Pearl, had been at fault 2 months earlier. The board felt that Captain Chard had displayed a want of skill in navigating his vessel, and the Pearl's sinking had been a result of the poor judgment. As such, Captain James Chard was stripped of his master's certificate as well as his licenses to take charge of steamers within the limits of any port. It was a burden Captain James Chard would no doubt carry with him for the rest of his life.